Go ahead.
Uh, okay, so briefly recap, we were invited by Chief and Council to come and help support redrafting and drafting a new election law and formed a working group of community members that has now met something like 16 or 17 times that has driven the content of the law. We are here for technical support. My name is Aubrey. I'm a lawyer. I'm from Metallic Law, and we have partnered with A.S. Williams Consulting, where Catherine is from, and a couple of other folks on the call. And so we are here providing the support to revise the law, but in a way that is driven by community. Um, I don't know if I should do a further intro. I'm a member of Kitigan Zibi. I'm an Algonquin, so I'm Anishinaabe, but from a different part of the country. I'm sitting here in Ottawa today, actually on my traditional territory. So that's me, and I'll let Catherine. Catherine, do you want to? I feel like you should introduce yourself as like someone you've
Hi.
probably had contact with everyone.
Hi everyone. My name is Catherine Sundin. I'm a project manager and I've been facilitating this project for the election law over the last 2.5 years and supporting Metallic Law. I work with A.S. Williams, which is a consulting group. And we have Saga Williams and Martina Marshall from our team on the call as well. And we have been working, as I mentioned, I also support Laxul on another project for the prevention team. So I'm also a technical support person, and we worked very closely with the working group over the last year to gather all of the content and the feedback from the community surveys and turn that into the law that we're discussing tonight.
Great, thank you. We'll go to the next slide. Um, these are the folks that have served on the working group. We've had a little bit of turnover, but we've had a good core group over the past 18 months or so. In case you guys know any of these folks on this list, yeah, it says 16 meetings. I think it's probably been more at this point. Back in January of this year, we kind of put the finishing touches on what we wanted the content to be and put that to council, and council approved that the substance of that law to kind of go forward through the process of getting it through Canada's approval and becoming formal law. And so what you will hear today has substantively been settled. There is a vote. This is a big theme, a vote in February 3rd. That is actually when the community decides whether or not to adopt the law. So council has approved it to go to a vote, but if the community does not approve, then it will not become law. So the substance of what is going to vote has been set, but everyone still gets a say in whether or not they want the law to be adopted. So just to get ahead of the question of why we are doing this, why council invited us to start this process, there was really a strong sentiment. Right now, elections are governed by the Indian Act and the regulations under the Indian Act. They are very inflexible rules. They're very rigid. They have 2-year terms. They prescribe every way in which an election must be run. And there's just no room for flexibility in that. And so there was also a feeling that Laxul should control its own leadership selection process and take over those rules, and in a way that they can also change them in the future. So um, it's an important part of self-independence and self-determination, as the last point is. But then also, once you take on the law and it becomes Laxul's law, also the ability to change it is Laxul's. And so removing yourselves from the Indian Act rules with respect to elections um, removes that you no longer have to be guided by kind of Canada's prescribed standards. And so you have this law in place, and if it's not working for you, you can tweak it over time, and it becomes something that is your own. This is a great we got this group called ThinkLink to come to one of our sessions and to put together a graphic representation of the process that we've been on to develop this law. Just for especially to kind of show what we've been doing in a different way. I'm a lawyer. I like lots of words, and that's kind of my jam, but I know a lot of people prefer to see things in a different way. And so this was an attempt to show in a different way what it is we're trying to do. I feel like we should circulate this, or it's on the web, it's on the website, right, Catherine? Yeah. So it can be looked at more closely. You're probably not going to have a lot of time right now to read all of it, but I think it's a really great representation of our process. I see that there's a question about there being no off-reserve Winnipeg person on the working group, and that's true. Sorry, Catherine, you just came off mute. Did you want to?
Oh, I was in the middle of writing back to you, Marie.
Oh,
There was the terms of reference that was created, and there was a call put out for participants. And I think at the time we probably only had a handful of off reserve members respond, and then there was a young member from Thunder Bay who responded, and we felt like that she would be a good fit because we wanted the perspective of off reserve and of youth, and so that's what that spot was filled by her. But certainly there was engagement done. So that's where we also got feedback from off reserve members.
right. Next. Um, Another question that has come up a lot right at the beginning is that we say things like we're getting out from the Indian Act, and that's true, but only with respect to elections. So if you pass your own law, that becomes the law with respect to elections, and the Indian Act rules no longer apply. But the Indian Act does apply in all other respects. So it's not that you're kind of doing away with the Indian Act entirely for Lac Seul. It's just with respect to elections, just the election regulation section of the Indian Act. Okay, so we're going to jump into the content. And just to note again on this slide, the new law vote will be on February 3rd. You'll have an opportunity to vote electronically, which is probably easiest for you guys living off reserve. But there will also be a mail-in ballot option. But just, I can't say it enough, February 3rd, we want people to vote. We want people to have their say. So please remember that date. Okay, next. So this is probably this graph here represents the biggest decisions I think that we were making with the working group. The time we spent the most time discussing how this representation will look. So as you know now, right now there's chief and council, there's chief and 8 councillors, and there's this structure by which 4 councillors come from Frenchman's Head, 3 from Kejik Bay, 1 from Whitefish Bay. There's no off reserve representation on council. And there's no other seats. That is the entirety of council. And also off reserve voters can only vote for the chief. The new structure will change that. So each of those districts will have 2 councillors, and there will also be a new district called off reserve for off reserve councillors, and 2 councillors that are not kind of designated from any district. They are those who get the next highest number of votes after the councillors from various districts are elected. And so that will make for a larger council. There will be 10 councillors, and we'll have more equal representation from all of we're calling them electoral districts. Frenchman's Head, Kejik Bay, Whitefish Bay, off reserve will all have 2 councillors from those districts. You can only run for the district that you live in, and everyone will vote for all of the councillors. So it will look quite a lot different from today, especially for off reserve folks. The ballots will look different. You'll get a ballot for all the seats, and you will have the opportunity to run for council, which is a big change, obviously. So when you're going through the nomination process, you can indicate, you live off reserve, and that's the category that you'll be put into. So this is a big change, and we'll kind of go through various aspects of it in the next slide. Well, as I mentioned, the voting rights will change. All members will vote for all councillors and the chief. So right now, off reserve, you get 1 ballot. It's for chief. That's the only vote you have. If you adopt this law, then you will get 5 ballots for chief, for Frenchman's Head, for Kejik Bay, for Whitefish Bay, and for off reserve. And all of the people running in each of those districts will be listed, and you'll have the opportunity to vote for 2 of them. And so you will have a lot more say in who gets elected. I'm sorry, I'm just getting over a cold and I'm having a bit of a coughing fit. The council term, the council term will be changed from it's currently 2 years. It will be 4 years. And then under the new law, if it's accepted. I say will, I mean if it's accepted. It's not a foregone conclusion. Um, the thinking behind this was that 4 years is enough time for people running to actually achieve what it is they promised that they would achieve when they're in office. So, they're running for council. They say they're going to do this, this, and this. And if it's only 2 years, there's just not a lot of time to actually achieve those things. And so this was actually something that had a lot of support in the surveys that we put out and in all of the kind of engagement that we did. There was a lot of support for extending that mandate, that council term. Another big change will be that there will be a mandatory candidate meeting, a candidate information meeting. So if you are running, you will be required to attend a session where you will have to answer questions from voters. So there will likely be one for chief and one for councilors, and depending on the number of councilors, maybe that will even be divided into districts, but nominees will have to attend. They will have an opportunity to say some remarks about why it is that they're running, and they will be required to answer questions that come in from community members, and that will be online and in person. That's a big change, and we think it's going to help with people learning about the candidates, especially when you're off reserve. You don't have a lot of opportunity to meet those who are running, and this will be your opportunity to see who is running, what they're saying they'll do, what their platform is, and then voting people in on that basis. And then they have a platform that if they don't achieve it, you can, the next time if they run again, you can ask, why didn't you achieve this? It's trying to build in some accountability. Hmm. Um, Sorry, Catherine, can you actually take over for a second? I'm having a little bit of trouble here. I'm just on the eligibility to run.
Oh, I was also muted. I was
Okay.
I was answering some of the questions in the chat.
Okay.
Can
Sorry,
you
just
hear
let me try to grab some water and
me?
a throat thing.
You're good. So another new content piece is eligibility to run. So as it is currently, you have to be a registered member over 18 years of age, not have been suspended indefinitely from office within the last 4 years. That speaks to the code of conduct, and pledge in writing to act in the interests of Lac Seul if elected. Also have knowledge or commit to acquiring knowledge of Lac Seul's history, culture, or values. So eligibility to run is different than like I guess criteria that some people were looking for in terms of qualifications. We heard a lot from the surveys and from the engagements that people wanted a lot of very high qualifications for people to be able to run for office for a council seat. And what was clear was that it's important that people are able to demonstrate that they have the qualifications to be able to run, that they have either it's financial acumen or maybe it's a level of education or just experience or knowledge about Lac Seul. And so as Aubrey was explaining the candidate information meeting, that forum that is mandatory is an opportunity for all candidates to talk about their qualifications and let voters decide whether or not someone is qualified and whether you want to support them and their proposed platform. So eligibility is really about the minimum criteria. We don't want to block people unnecessarily or discriminate against people maybe who haven't had the opportunity to get a higher level of education, for instance. But we do want to make sure that there's some very basic criteria. And so that's what eligibility is about. We want to make sure, obviously, that they're over 18 years of age and a member of Lac Seul, but most importantly, that they haven't been suspended before. And so that piece about pledging in writing and understanding knowledge and values of Lac Seul is really about someone who's committed to the community. And if they haven't had the opportunity to become very well versed in the history, culture, and values of Lac Seul, at least they're committed to do that, and they'll be given the opportunity to do that. I know there's some questions and we will definitely come back. Um, what I will address this one question about how do we know who has been suspended in the last 4 years? That would have been part of the current council, so the governance coordinator, um, or or the I guess the electoral officer would have access to that information when they're applying, and they wouldn't be eligible. So their nomination form would be rejected. So that would be a part of the screening process of the nomination. But then also again in the candidates information meeting, there would be an open forum where people are allowed to pose questions to candidates. And that way, if someone did have information that they felt excluded someone from running based on quality of their experience, or perhaps if they had some moral deficiencies or they have some what they feel is objectionable in their character or behavior, they could bring that forward at that candidate information meeting, and it's an opportunity for someone to defend themselves, or at least for other people to hear what has happened and whether or not they feel like they want to still support someone. Oops, sorry. Okay, we'll come back to some questions. I'll just get through this last piece and then maybe we'll pause and go back. The nomination process is a little bit different. Right now, I'm not sure if everyone's familiar, but the nomination process is that you show up at a general meeting and people can nominate themselves or they can nominate others, even if they're not in the room. And that sometimes can be confusing. So the electoral officer has to follow up lots of different nominees, whether or not they maybe even know they've been nominated. So, in order to clean up that process, we're putting something a little bit more structured. And this was at the feedback of the community through surveys and also from the working group that there needs to be a nomination form, so a standardized form that includes information about the candidate and also 10 supporting signatures from other members. They also need to make sure they're signing off themselves. That seems basic, but that's currently not the case. You can't nominate someone without them being aware of it. And also, there's a $100 fee, and that's just to encourage serious candidates from running. So we don't want someone who's just throwing their hat in the ring on a whim. We want it to make sure that A, that they have some support already, and B, that they are very serious about their intention to run. And candidates can still run for both chief and council positions, but they must pay a fee and put a form in for both positions. This is actually currently the case that members are allowed to run for more than one position. And that was discussed at length, and it was determined by the working group that this was still allowed. Obviously, if the person was to win, then they would have to choose which position they would go forward with. The voting day is the third Tuesday of September every 4 years. And that's a change because right now it's in November, and it's our understanding that that actually was pushing back a little bit over the last few cycles, just based on scheduling. And we've heard and seen that council starting their new term towards the end of November is somewhat problematic from an orientation perspective. It takes a little while for them to get up to speed, and then there's an AGM in January, so it kind of makes practical sense that if they are elected a little bit earlier in the fall, there's more time for them to become oriented, and then they would be able to speak more in depth about their portfolios and be up to speed by the time the AGM happens in January. The voting process as well. You're familiar with the mail-in ballot, of course, which has many problems. The in-person ballot, which then is problematic for off-reserve members. But now there will be an electronic ballot, which I think is the most important thing, especially for those of you who are calling from off-reserve. Electronic ballots have only been available for ratification votes or settlement votes previously in Laxel, is our understanding. And so having the general election be available online should make the process of receiving your ballot, because it's electronic, it's online. You would just register through a software provider like OneFeather, and that would allow you to cast your ballot online at your convenience, and you wouldn't have to worry about the mail. So that's a big change, hopefully to your benefit. And appeals and complaints. Currently, you would have to appeal any issue that you feel is an error in the process of the election, or if there's any allegations of corruption, that needs to be lodged with the minister of ISC. And so that is a big change in that Laxel would be able to appoint their own independent outside adjudicator, which would allow a more efficient process to ensure that members are able to be heard in a timely manner and that complaints can be looked at and managed very quickly. So that's a positive change as well. That typically would be an outside adjudicator, like perhaps counsel for the First Nation, or another person who has provided support that they feel like is knowledgeable and able to be fair and independent. And lastly, and then we'll take your questions, is the code of conduct. So this is not a part of the election law because the election law really governs the process by which an election is run and by which councillors are chosen. The code of conduct is about what happens after someone is elected and then speaks to that whole idea of how someone might be suspended or removed from their seat. And the code of conduct was created through this governance project and with the working group. And it was passed by BCR in September 2024. And so in 2025, at the AGM in January, the current council swore an oath of office, which is a new thing that they have to do, and they agreed to follow this code of conduct. And the code of conduct touches on many different things and was developed out of community feedback and speaks to, again, that level of the request that we heard that counselors play a role model role and that they are able to demonstrate good behavior while they're in office. And so there is now a process. There's now a process by which counselors can be removed, which they haven't before. Let me just pause for 1 sec. Aubrey, are you back? Oh,
Thank you.
sorry.
I was stuck on mute because
Yeah. We've got quite a few questions. I'm wondering if maybe we pause here to talk about those before we go into the FAQs.
Sure. I've been trying to answer some in the chat.
Okay. So
Um,
I'm gonna read a couple out loud just because I know that there's that maybe not everyone's following the chat, so
yeah,
they might benefit from hearing. So the first question was who sends out the voting package, and they didn't receive the package last time. So I just wanted to reassure everyone that this is a common issue, and it has to do with I think the challenge Laxwell has from keeping membership information up to date. And I think that is an ongoing challenge, but the good news is that the online voting process should hopefully alleviate some of those mail issues. So this time there will be this vote will be through One Feather, and they've administered previous votes. So if you've ever registered with One Feather before, you're already in the system, and you'll receive the information through your email. We'll also be posting all of this information several times on Facebook, on the Laxwell website, and if anyone has given us their email before for newsletters, we'll make sure we send it out that way as well. And you can put your email in the chat if you haven't done that before, and we can put you on our distribution list. Also, there's a question about how come they can run for both positions of chief and a counselor. Did you want to speak to that, Aubrey?
sure. There is, I mean, some First Nations do this and some don't, right? Some require you to have to choose and only run in one position. We talked about this in the working group and decided to keep it that you can run for both chief and council positions. And you have to indicate on your nomination form that if you're running for both, which one you will choose if you win. So that part is clear up front. But I understand that it is done differently in different places, but I think the idea was to not eliminate, you know, if people want to be on council and want to also run for chief, if you require them to choose one or the other, you lose may potentially good candidates for the other position. And so the idea was to try to ensure that all, you know, good candidates can run in both and leave that up to the electorate, to the voters to decide which one they should win. So that's the idea behind that. Um,
Do we want to speak to the one about how people know that if someone is eligible, being that they're really the only thing that precludes eligibility is that they have been suspended before. And since that's not posted publicly, it's up to the electoral officer to be
yeah.
aware.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Note that.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean there is an electoral officer who runs every election. So there is one in every election. They have a certain amount of training, and they are recruited before the election starts. There's an open call for people to apply, and someone gets selected before the election is called. And so that person is usually very familiar with running elections. And we'll have actually a check. There's a checklist in the law as one of the schedules that they will have when someone produces their nomination papers. They'll have a checklist to make sure that they filled out every part of that nomination form. So there's not a lot of discretion. If they have been suspended, the electoral officer will know who has been suspended and you also have, there's a place on the form, on the nomination form, to say that, you haven't been suspended. So that will be caught by the electoral officer.
So it's not likely that someone's going to be able to participate in the candidate's information meeting if they had been suspended before. With respect to how that information is shared with you during a council term, we can't really speak to that because that's more of a question of how council is sharing decisions that are made at that time.
Yeah, yeah. Um,
I think.
So there's some questions about hearing from candidates, which I think are very good, and I think it's very important that candidates get out there and talk about why it is that they're running. Right now, there's no rules whatsoever about how candidates campaign, aside from the usual, you can't be corrupt, like there's no bribery, things like that. But so some people will do signs, some people will post on Facebook, some people will even have maybe live Facebook kind of forums, and some don't. So it's a little bit all over. We were trying with this candidates information meeting to at least have one opportunity where all of the candidates need to be heard. And aside from that, we've also left it very open, just because so it really depends on the candidate and their style, the extent to which they kind of get out there and want to engage. We think now that the fact that people are voting for all counselor positions, like it's no longer, if you're living in Frenchman's Head and you're running from Frenchman's Head, you still need to get support from outside of your own district. And so I think that will encourage people to do more of maybe those online things or Facebook things, just so that other people in other districts and off reserve know them. But we can't predict that, and there's no rules about that. We just know that there needs to be this one information meeting where voters can get a sense of all of the candidates at one time. Can a chief be removed under the code of conduct? They can. The chief is subject to the same rules as council in that code of conduct. So there have been some questions. I think people are having a hard time finding that code of conduct. So we're going to try to put it in a more prominent spot it's on the Laxwell website under governance, but I think we're going to try to kind of put it right up top so people can get to it quickly. Candidates should say if they have read and understood the code of conduct, that will be a requirement. And they also say an oath when they are elected into office. That was, Catherine mentioned, that was done this past year.
There's a lot of questions about how they get to know people who are running and what their platform is. So that's where I think it has to be a minimum bar set, and that's what the candidates information meeting is for. That's really the opportunity for candidates to be able to promote themselves, and that's an opportunity. It would be recorded and virtual as well, of course. And so that's an opportunity for you as off reserve members to then view that and decide what you like. And it's also on the onus is on the candidate to promote themselves and to provide information on a platform. If they don't, then that's up to you whether you feel comfortable voting for someone who doesn't. So I would think that is we have to set the forum and allow there for a place for people to go to promote themselves, but then you have to let the candidates decide what they're going to do. I think as if this process passes, there would certainly be a basic template provided to candidates so that they would be able to provide information about their platform and their qualifications. But again, that's just like any election. It would be up to the voters to decide whether they feel like they've received enough information from that person, given the mediums that are available. So yes, and that information can be posted on the Laxel website as well.
Whether there should be more than one ombudsperson, I think is the question. Um, as it is now, complaints go to the minister, and they are, I mean, it says the minister, but there's somebody designated within ISC to deal with election law grievances, and it is typically, one person, a case officer who kind of deals with those. In this case, we've chosen one person because they are required to be independent of the community, and they will be paid for their time. So there is a cost concern there as well. And I think that the types of corruption or complaints that are envisioned that person would address is I think it is sufficient for one person. And any concerns about having any kind of bias, which maybe is that I don't know if that's the reason why you think there should be more than one, that there's a panel to ensure more kind of independence. It's a requirement that the ombudsperson is independent and has no conflict of interest with the community. So it will typically be someone from outside of Lac School. It will often be a lawyer. It doesn't have to be, but somebody who doesn't have those, who wasn't involved in the election at all. So they do have to be independent. That's a criteria for retaining them. And so I'm hoping that kind of addresses your concern about it only being one person.
Another question is how far in advance is the candidate meeting before the vote? I believe it's 30 days at least, a minimum, or maybe 45. It's a good amount of.
It is, that's a good question. I think it's held in the month of August, if I'm not
Yeah,
mistaken.
but I think
And the election is in September. So it has to be sometime in the month of August.
yeah. There's a couple questions there, Marie. We can unmute you in a little bit, but I think that some of these are not related to the election process. I think you're asking questions about counselors and how they're involved in decision making at the program level, and also about chief and council meetings being open to the public or to members and transparency. I believe they are supposed to be right now. I'm not going to speak to exactly what should or shouldn't happen with that because that's not within the purview of the election law. But I think you have great questions, and those ones should be brought to council. And if that isn't happening, then perhaps a request to make that happen.
Yeah. Yeah, those are kind of ongoing governance matters, which I think are very valid, um, but are something that happen after people are elected, right? How they conduct themselves while in office. And there is this new um, code of conduct and guidelines for chief and council about how things should go. So that is a new that has been passed in the past year. So there are new rules and guidance on the conduct of chief and council, but for ongoing kind of transparency and accountability issues, those aren't actually in the election law, but they are definitely legitimate concerns that definitely should be raised. Hmm. Hmm. In terms of the ombudsperson, yes, chief and council does hire them. That's true. And but there, I mean, it is a requirement that like the criteria that they have is that they're qualified. Um, I
I,
think that, sorry, go ahead,
I know
Catherine.
I just froze. I wasn't sure if everyone was
Oh,
good. I think it was
um,
maybe just me. Um, Maybe we can take everyone through.
yeah, you were freezing a little bit before, so I think I'm thinking it's you and
Okay.
well.
There's a few frequently asked questions here that might answer some other questions that you haven't had a chance to ask, and maybe will trigger some thoughts and additional discussion. Thank you for all your questions so far. Um,
Mhm.
we will come back to the chat as well, and certainly we can unmute anyone who would like to. Just want to make sure everyone's not talking over each other. In terms of the frequently asked questions, I've seen some of these questions in the chat about how the community was engaged and how this content was developed. So it wasn't just the working group. I know that was a point earlier, because there's 8 members and certainly they don't represent every single demographic of Lac Seul, but they should represent many. And that group was critical, certainly, and they did meet monthly for over a year to drive the content and ensure that community voices were heard, but also many meetings with chief and council. There was also two separate surveys which were distributed widely through online and in-person events. We had over 200 responses there. There were community information sessions all throughout 2023 and 2024, including elders gatherings and off-reserve events. There were Christmas events, the treaty days, the AGMs, and then also the Laxel website. There's been a governance page for the last year that included all this information, and there have been off-reserve sessions over the last 3 months as well. Why is this happening so soon? I guess that is a question of what you think of as soon. So what we've been led to understand is that this process has actually gone back 20 years and that council has made it a mandate several times to try to update governance and to reform the election process. Currently, there is this chief and council that's currently sitting, those of them that have been in for more than one term, they have made it their mandate to have this change made. And that's because they don't want to have another Indian Act election in 2026. Because if this is the will of a majority of the membership, it's important that this next election doesn't happen under the Indian Act, because then you're just in that process again and again, and you're repeating it every 2 years. So it's a good opportunity that if this change is going to be made, then we make it with enough time to make sure that the next vote will happen before the general in September 2026. Why does Laxel need changes to the voting rules in the proposed election law? So we did talk about that a little bit earlier, but most of it really comes down to fairness, because off-reserve members currently don't have a say in all elected positions. And also, when you think about it, on-reserve members also don't really have a say in the councillors who represent them as a whole. They only really vote for those that live in their community. So Frenchman's Head members are only voting for Frenchman's Head councillors, but they are represented by all 8 councillors. And so are you if you're an off-reserve member. So really it speaks to making sure that all members have a say in all elected positions. And then importantly, also the law, it requires, the charter requires a greater voice for off-reserve members. And I'm sure all of you agree with that if you're an off-reserve member. Why is the number changing from 8 to 10 as opposed to, say, keeping it at 8 and then changing the composition? So this spoke to the surveys that we did and any of the community engagement events where we were asking for feedback. And what we heard was that most people said that they wanted to see change. They wanted to see balancing of the communities represented across the council, but they didn't want to take away from the way that representation works now. So in order to add on seats to make sure that off-reserve members have representation fairly, it made sense to perhaps add on instead of take away from the number of on-reserve seats. And also the idea of the at-large councillors that Aubrey mentioned on the first slide, where we looked at the table where we compared the way that council is represented now and the way that it will be under the new law. And it allows for more balance. So we have 2 representatives from each of the 3 on-reserve communities, 2 from off-reserve, and then that last 2, the 9th and 10th seats, they could come from anywhere. So that really speaks to that idea of one Lac-Seul. We're calling them at-large councillors. You could call them Lac-Seul as a whole councillors. Either way, it comes from the candidates who have the highest votes after those seats are filled. So it's allowing there to be balance and for a more holistic mix and to represent the community as a whole. And going to 10 is a more fair way to do that than taking away from the 8 that we currently have. What will the 2 off-reserve councillors do? These are some proposed responsibilities that we heard from council currently, and also from asking for feedback from members like yourselves. They could include engaging with off-reserve members, staffing an off-reserve office to support urban members depending on where they live and the population in that off-reserve center, attending off-reserve meetings that normally require travel, representing Lac-Seul in business development opportunities in urban centers. I'm sure you're aware that councillors from on-reserve are often traveling off-reserve to attend these meetings, so it would make logical sense that perhaps they could fill that role more effectively. and supporting portfolios with greater travel. As I mentioned, economic development perhaps, or lands and resources are just examples, but this was something that would have to be formalized based on the council that was elected and where those two councilors who are off reserve actually live once that happens. And then the at-large counselors, that's a question that we get asked quite a bit. They are just the same as all the other counselors because they would have portfolios the same as all the other counselors. And as I mentioned, they're the counselors with the next highest number of votes after two are chosen from each district. And so it's regardless of which community they live in, they still have the same responsibilities. They still have to attend every single meeting. They still have to respond to complaints, issues, requests from members, regardless of where they live. And again, they would have a portfolio just the same as any other counselor from on or off reserve.
Mhm.
How much will these changes cost is a question we get a lot. So clearly, two additional counselors would be two additional salaries or honoraria. They would be paid the same amount as the two additional counselors would be paid the same amount as all of the other counselors because they have the same responsibilities. This has been cleared with the administration of Lac Seul that it would be part of the organization's budget overall. There isn't a set number, a set amount of funding that comes from ISC for each counselor's position. There's just an amount of governance funding, and that's usually topped up by the nation as well to meet market rates for compensation. So it's really a decision of Lac Seul as to how much they want to allocate for this budget. And they said that if the will of the community is that there is additional council positions, then they would fund that. We also know that there would be savings primarily because the election wouldn't be happening every 2 years, so that's significant. Elections are quite expensive, so not having it every 2 years would go quite a distance to defraying this additional cost. And then, of course, travel costs if off-reserve members are attending primarily off-reserve meetings, and we can encourage on-reserve members to attend by Zoom. There would be some savings there. And Aubrey mentioned this before, but very important to note that this can be changed in the future. This is a step towards having self-determination for this particular aspect of the Indian Act. And once it is passed, Lac Seul isn't removed from the election regulations, but it can be changed by membership in the future. So an amendment could be proposed by council and another vote could take place in order to adopt a change. So that's important to note that if any aspect of this was to not work very well in the future, or people really felt like something was wrong, they wanted to see a change, that certainly is possible in the future. And it wouldn't have to follow the whole process that we've just currently embarked on, which is that you would have to go through ISC approval. That wouldn't be required in the future. It would be owned by Lac Seul and then could be changed by Lac Seul through a community approval vote process. So we'll take more questions, but just wanted to wrap up with how we can get more information. There will be information booths and attendees of the team at all of the Christmas feasts coming up. So that's in Winnipeg in November 24th, I believe, and Thunder Bay on the 28th. And then there's ones in Red Lake, Sioux Lookout, and I'm missing another one, but they're publicized on the Facebook page, I believe, and on the website. So all the Christmas feasts, there will be someone to answer questions if you would like to hear more information and talk in person. We'll put our
Actually,
contact.
we need to introduce Leslie. I saw that Leslie's on the call. I don't know if he was there when I saw him before, but Leslie's the governance coordinator at Lac Seul, and so he will be at several of the feasts and is an expert in the election law and all of these topics. So I don't know, Leslie, if you want to come on video and say hi. You don't have to. I'm really calling you out here. But Leslie King is it will be around a lot as well and is somebody in the community that you can always reach out to with questions as well.
There will also be the information packages that are going out that I mentioned earlier. They will go in the mail and they'll also be posted online for registering with One Feather. There's lots on social media. There have been some videos. The website's updated. You can find all of this information there. We'll post the recording of this meeting, and there's an information meeting in January. I think we've confirmed it's going to be the night of the AGM. So there'll be an opportunity for people to ask virtually or in person questions specifically about how to vote. It's mostly about the process at that point, but certainly if you have any questions about understanding the content, that's a good opportunity to do that as well. And there's some great resources on the website as well that did recently go out in a mail package that was sent to all mailing addresses that are kept with the administration. So hopefully most of you received this. I know there's challenges with Canada Post right now, but that included a quick reference guide and an FAQ, which is essentially the content that we presented tonight. So we will go to the chat perhaps. Aubrey, did you catch any questions?
Yeah, there have been some I actually I wonder if we want to like allow people off mute because I feel like there are some questions that may have follow-ups. I've been trying to answer them in the chat, but maybe if people could raise their hands just because I think there are enough of us that it could get chaotic if people just started talking. But I do feel like you guys are a really engaged group, so this is really good, and I think we should get into some discussion. So in the meantime, what is the determination used in the ratification process? The ratification of the election law is a community vote. And so if a majority votes in favor, the election law gets approved. I'm not sure if that answers the question, but um, okay, Marie.
I'm unmuting you, Marie. Sorry, I'm just playing with the controls here.
Marie had a lot of questions in the chat, so I feel like it's more fruitful to just let you talk, Marie.
Yes, 1 second. I'm just, it's jumping around. Okay,
Okay.
there you go.
There you
Hi.
go.
Bonjour. Deba mais
Hi, bonjour.
dicas muito tempo. Obrigo kangenis de bendaus. Hi, my name is Marie Lands, and I am a Laxul band member. I'm from the Moose Clan, and I'm really excited about this. I'm not saying I'm a naysayer or anything. I just always have 10 million questions that drill down right to the ground level. I am excited about.
I think we met a couple of years ago at Treaty Days.
Yeah, I did. I filled out a
Yeah,
form there. Yeah,
yeah,
and I filled out a survey as well
yep,
that got mailed to
exactly.
us. But anyway, because we've been off reserve for all our lives, basically. And like my grandfather, my history stems from Lac Seul. He was World War I vet and left when all the lands were flooded. We went to Macintosh, but that's what happened to the history of our people. But anyway, saying that, I mean, I'm excited for the election code. It's about time they move away from the Indian Act. But I guess my concern is, you know, I've made a lot of friends in Lac Seul over the years, and I've made it my business to know, to be part of the community and to feel part of that process. And I think this is a great move. I'm not saying it's wrong, but I do believe that if we're going to, and I've heard it before over the years, there have been council members who've done wrong and have gotten away with it and swept under the rug. And how transparent, that's the election code. How transparent is it going to be? Because in the past few years, there's even been people that are on council who's been suspended and are still sitting there. And it's disappointing to know that. And then you think about the integrity of the council after all of these things happen. So I'm really hoping that there is going to be a lot of balances in place and rules in place to ensure that if one of these people do harm a band member in some way or whatever, they do have the code of ethics. I chaired the last year AGM when the chief and council did their code of ethics before the
Yeah.
people, and then still something happened after that, and you just wonder, okay, well, okay, if that didn't work, then if we're going to have our own election code and somebody gets suspended, then it really needs to occur because we cannot have people lose the integrity of this process and lose trust and make the changes that's important for people to say, yeah, things are changing, we're being heard, we're off reserve. Two-thirds of us are off reserve. Nobody ever hears us, right? But you hear everything for on reserve. And of course, we know ISC makes it limited like that. But for us off reserve, if we're going to have off reserve counselors and we have two-thirds off reserve, why isn't there more off reserve counselors than on reserve?
Okay, so
That's one of my
I'm
questions.
hearing a few questions there.
Yeah,
The first is about kind of chief and counsel's conduct,
yeah,
right? Which I think is something we've heard a lot about,
yeah,
and there was
yeah,
a lot of support when we did that survey for having that code of conduct and that kind of guideline for chief and counsel. That was a really, really big topic, and
yeah,
so that was developed and it was just put in place, this year.
yeah,
So there is a new conduct that allows people to be suspended, and I hear what you're saying that there are still issues there, and I'm sure they are. I'm sure there are. I think what the election law provides for that is that if someone's suspended, they are not eligible to run again. So that's one thing. But even if there is this kind of bad behavior, having stuff like the candidates info meeting and having a wider vote hopefully allows for greater accountability in that way. So, if you know a little bit more about the candidates that you are voting for, and if they have an opportunity to speak to you and you have an opportunity to ask them questions, and they need to do a little bit more to get the votes that they need to be elected. If there was bad behavior in office, then there's an opportunity for that to come out and for people to decide not to vote for that person. So a lot of what you're talking about is stuff like in while they're in office already, and so it is not really the proper place for it isn't in the election law, but there are ways of holding those people accountable in terms of not reelecting them. And that's what we're kind of trying, one of the things that this law is trying to do to provide for a more informed vote
yeah,
by those little tools. And the other question is one we also get a lot in off reserve engagements, where they're more a greater seat for off reserve people given the population size. And it was a really challenging process to try to make that balance. We knew that off reserve members needed a voice. Right now, there's virtually no voice on council. There obviously needs to be something. The charter requires that there is something. But there's also people on reserve who point to the fact that the resources that are provided to the community are really dedicated to the on reserve population. And so people who sit on council and make the kind of decisions that about governing the on reserve population really should be from that on reserve population. So that was the kind of a compelling reason on the other side. And what we came up with, I think, is actually quite a good compromise between having giving a voice where there was none before and still being palatable to people on reserve who don't want to give off reserve people any voice. There's really that kind of spectrum of views. And when we did a survey on the question, there was a real divide between how to do that. So it was not easy. And I think there's a reason that Laxul has tried to revise their election law or develop their own election law. We keep hearing about more times that they've tried this in the past. We originally thought it was like 3 efforts in the past. Now it's looking more like 5 or 6. And various, issues have come up on the way, and the effort has been abandoned. And so we really think that we've done a really thoughtful process, and we've really considered every option. We put forward a good compromise, and that's kind of the best we could do, I think, under the circumstances. So it's probably not an entirely satisfactory answer, but it explains a little bit about how we got here, I think.
okay. I can think the other thing is about having a clear no criminal charges as a council, because I mean, as a chief, I understand you can't have that currently right now. You can't have any charges, but I'm not sure about council. I think there should be
There's
criminal
actually
rec
no, right now there's nothing, and there's nothing about having a criminal conviction that would
Okay.
prevent people from
Okay, so
running.
I think that should be something that should be in the code because
Yeah.
how do you
Which
trust
is this,
somebody
yeah.
knowing that they've, broken a law? How can you trust that person? That's one of the things that really I believe needs to be in the law. And I think when I wrote my survey or applied or whatever, I can't remember which of us talking to you or if it was on a survey, but
Yeah, we did the, yeah,
yeah,
I remember giving you the form. I mean, you
yeah.
filled it out, but
We
yeah.
need to have educated people on the council that
Yeah.
understand the larger national policy as well as local stuff that's going on because as it is right now, we missed the boat and everything. And here we are, we have opportunities for off-reserve voice. And I mean, if we're going to be an off-reserve voice with no resources, that why are we going to vote? I mean, it's just ridiculous. So just those things. I mean, I do
Yeah.
welcome the election code. I'm not saying it's not a good thing. It's a
No,
start.
questions are good. Questions are
Yeah.
good and trying to really figure out how this will work. We had a long conversation at the working group about that, the issue of the of a criminal record. And there's strong feelings on either side. And again, in the survey, this was one of the questions that really divided the community. It was hard to determine what exactly would disqualify somebody, and where in the process, if they had been arrested but not, they were still kind of going through a process. They haven't actually been proven guilty of anything, could you disallow that person from running? It got to be quite a kind of a complicated discussion. And we decided in the end to not have a bar on criminal convictions in the past, and instead that be something that should be a topic of conversation at the candidates information meeting.
Yeah, that
Maybe
because
a requirement is that everyone discloses that. Like maybe someone stands up and asks a question to every counselor, do you have a criminal history? And so that could just be getting that information out. And again, it's left to the voters then to decide whether is that a crime that I can't, like, you can never. There are also cases of people who have committed horrible crimes in their past, but have gone through their punishment and have, have become better people in the end
yeah,
who would do, who you would trust to not do that again. So it is really complicated. And we kind of decided to leave it out given those complexities. And you had another question about, no, I can't remember.
There's a few questions about transparency to your point, Marie, from Deborah, and I think that it's a great point. It's about how does this information get shared? It's not perfect right now. The Code of Conduct provides a process which wasn't there before, where that a complaint can be lodged, and there's a whole process map that would show who you send that complaint to, how that complaint is investigated, and then how ultimately a decision is made by council on how to censure or how to punish, suspend, and so on. There's like kind of a stepwise process depending on the severity of what of an issue is, and suspension obviously is one of the most severe issues. So that's not something that requires a public notice at this point. It's not built into the process. If that's something that the community really wants, that can certainly be added to the code of conduct. I would encourage you to petition counselors about that if you feel like that needs to be added. But at this point, it's just that there's a process by which counselors can be suspended. And we would rely on certainly members of either the administration or the electoral officer to pose these questions at the general candidates information meeting to have this information shared at the time. But there isn't the example you gave was about if you're part of a professional association, there may be notices shared if there's misconduct of some kind. And currently that's not a part of the process. And I think it's a point well taken, and that could be built into the policy in the future.
I
okay.
agree. Yeah, that's
All
a
right.
very good point.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thanks, Marie. There's a few other questions. Um, You asked about the notice, and there's a question about the simple majority. How does that differ from a higher threshold, like the 50% versus 50 plus one?
So a simple majority is just of everyone who votes, a majority must approve. And so if 50% of those who vote plus one. Um, and then the next question is, what if there's a low voter turnout? There is no threshold for this vote. So there's no minimum vote required. We hope by providing electronic voting and mail-in voting and in-person voting that it won't be excessively low. So we're trying to provide all of the means to vote that we can, and we're doing a lot to publicize the vote itself. So it's our hope that turnout will be reasonable. Are there any other, does anyone else want to have a question they want to
If
chat
you
through?
put your name in the chat, I can unmute you. Or you can type your question in and I can read it out. I think, Elizabeth, are you unmuted? Did you want to speak to that question?
The question about the simple majority versus the higher threshold.
It sounds like you're concerned about the low voter turnout.
Yeah.
And
Or any of your questions. You've had a lot of great questions. Are you Betty?
Yeah,
Hi. Hi. Great. I'm glad you were able to join.
yeah. Well, thank you for the link. Yeah, I was just wondering about that because there are in some instances where when you have a ratification vote, especially one as important as a vote on election law, that there should be a higher threshold in terms of encouraging more people to become involved. And that of course that goes back to how you get the word out. And I did hear some good points made about how this was being sent out into the community, and I think that's great. But I think the essential thing is that they vote on this, and that it be more than a simple majority, because I think that a higher threshold is more important, especially in election law. Not so much on policy or anything like that, but actual laws that will govern the people.
For the ratification process, we there's this whole process that Indigenous Services Canada, in order to remove Lac Seul from the Indian Act regulations, election regulations, and kind of authorize or not authorize, like to say that they're no longer governed by the Indian Act. ISC has required certain ratification processes, and they have not required. They just require a simple majority. So that is where we landed in terms of the vote, and that is what council approved. So I think that's I've been involved in other votes where there is a threshold, and they're usually quite difficult to achieve. We're really hoping to get people's interest because it is a really important issue, and so we are hoping, by making it easy to vote, but also we really have done a lot of engagement. We've been to the community quite a few times, and then we have been going to urban centers more and doing mail outs and really trying to get the word out so that people know to vote. But it's hard to force people to vote. If they don't,
Yeah.
If they don't want to, they don't. And so I think that's the concern on the other side of setting a minimum, that maybe people don't vote because they don't care, and in which case it's like, well, should we make them care? And are they going to have an informed vote in that instance? So it's kind of a tricky, I understand it would be very dissatisfying if it's like 100 people who decide whether or not this gets approved. But we are hoping, by doing quite a lot of outreach, that won't be the case.
Okay. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. And if there are any other questions too, you had a lot of really great questions. So
I just have a minor point on section 2.13.2. And it mentions a third vacancy. But I don't
Yes.
They understand that part.
Okay, yeah, that is for when a bylaw is triggered. So if the chief vacates his or her position, and it's more than 6 months to the next election, immediately a by-election will be run to elect a new chief. But for council, because there's a higher likelihood that one of the 10 would for some reason vacate their seat. It's for, illness, there's a variety of reasons why someone may resign from council or be suspended. We didn't have it triggered for each time that happens, because by-elections are also very costly and cumbersome. So one person can vacate their seat and the council can proceed as normal, and even two people can. There can be 2 empty seats on council, basically, but if there's a third councillor who resigns or for whatever reason vacates their seat, that then a bylaw is triggered for all three of the vacant seats. That's
Okay.
what that provision is supposed to say. So if it's not clear, I'm going to go back and look at it and make sure that it's
Yeah.
comprehensible.
Okay.
And that's just for kind of, I feel like the community would be just in constant or like very frequent bylaws cycles if we didn't have that provision.
Okay. I see your reasoning there.
Thanks.
Thanks. Is there anyone else who would like to ask a question live, or feel free to type it in the chat. You can put up your hand, or if you can't find that feature, just type your name in the chat and I will unmute you.
There were some questions earlier about finding out, getting information in the newsletter and stuff. I've seen a couple of people post their email addresses.
Yeah, we'll definitely write that down
We'll
and we will. I
add
think
those to the.
we can provide the recording, like that recording file. We're going to ask Black Soul IT to post that on the website. That might take them a few days, but we can certainly try to post it somewhere where you can access it as soon as possible.
Great.
So that was one of the questions. And then by all means, if you want to put your email in the chat, then we will make sure you're on the mailing list as well for all the information.
I'm a big fan of our newsletters. I think they look very nice. So,
yes, thank you to Martina.
Martina, yeah.
Okay, I don't see anyone else putting their names in the chat, so hopefully we were able to answer your questions. Oh, nope, there's maybe one more. Oh, Tammy.
Tammy's getting a hold of Marie.
Okay, Marie, Tammy wants to talk to you. You can see in the chat. And if that's good for everyone, oh, Marie has maybe another question. I think I'm unmuting you. I'm trying. Are you there?
Yeah. Can you hear me
Great.
now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, I just have a question because I know some other bands that do election codes and that and I don't know if it's old school or what, but do they develop constitutions with their election codes?
So a constitution process is different, but I think this is one step kind of in that direction where you start to draft your own law and, govern, First Nation starts governing itself, and then it becomes, then we want to govern our own membership list or govern our own, child welfare laws, and a constitution then becomes something that is like an overarching set of principles to guide all of those laws. So they're not necessary to one another, but they're part of the same kind of drive towards self-determination, I would say. And a constitution is very useful for like setting out those principles, like this is what we believe as a community, and these are the principles we abide by. And then you can take those when you're drafting all of your other laws and make sure that those laws are consistent with the Constitution.
Okay.
Does that answer your question? Was it a little bit academic? I see there's a question about how someone would run for council, and whether it's too late. So first we need to pass this law and have it go into effect. So if it gets passed February 3rd, then it will be in effect for the next election, which will be next September. And in that case, you will have plenty of time to put your name in to be a candidate for the off-reserve positions. There's a whole process where the vote is announced and a notice goes out about the date, and then also the date by which you need to send in your nomination papers. And so that will be clear. That will happen in the summertime. So you would look for that in July. But the first order of business is passing this law. So that's what we're hoping. If this doesn't pass, then there will be an election in the fall as well, but it will be under the Indian Act, and unfortunately, off-reserve members cannot run. Oh, sorry, Catherine actually already said all of that.
Okay, better to address it. I wasn't sure if we had time.
Okay.
And I think Betty was asking about a concerted effort by council, I think, to reach out to off-reserve members, like as part of their role. I And I think to obtain email or other addresses by like for council and the administration to do that. And we hear that all the time. And certainly I think there are efforts being made to do that. I know that probably after this process is complete, then Leslie, as the governance coordinator, I think one of his things on his portfolio for his new position, which was created for this, is to create a better membership database that would allow for membership information like mailing addresses, emails, all that to be kept to date more alive. And then I think the administration could be encouraged to communicate via email more often and not just over Facebook. We hear that a lot. And we have certainly passed all of this along. But also, and you're saying, Betty, also related to membership, I think that is something that is on the horizon for the community. There's been some discussion that investigating membership rules and how that relates for Laxwell is a possibility, but they wanted to get through this mandate, this topic first, and see how it goes, and then I think that possibly would be in the near future, but not necessarily to do with us or this process. So I don't want to speak to that. Okay, well, I know we're a little bit over time, but thank you everyone so much for joining and for the excellent questions. And we will certainly pass on the recording information and we'll make it available to other officer members through the website. And if you want to pass it on to your colleagues, your friends, anyone else who's interested, we would appreciate you spreading the word.
February 3rd. That's all
And
you need
voting.
to say to them. Vote
Whatever
on
you
February
decide.
3rd.
Make sure you participate regardless of your decision.
Yes, just please vote.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a great night.